The law looks very innocuous, and I have to think that the president probably is so busy with other stuff that he doesn't understand that he's about to be duped. I have to believe that. I cannot believe that he would think that to allow the banks to once again, okay, get the upper hand when their hand has literally been caught in the cookie jar. See, this isn't like the other frauds and the other crises where you had these mortgage brokers, oh, this is a great loan, you're going to be at 2% for the rest of your life, but in fact it was a negative AM and it went up to 6, and the next thing you know, you owe the bank more, okay? And you had no evidence of that, and then the mortgage brokers all went out of business. Oh, they were agents, they were not really part of the bank, you know, we were independent contractors, you know, we had no, okay? This time, we got them with their hand in the cookie jar, right now, okay? And while that's happening, the Senate and the House very quietly decided to pass H.R. 3808. The U.S. Senate just passed it 2 days ago. The press has not talked about it. I don't know why. I think they missed it. And by the way, they've been sleeping at the switch too, okay? We want to start talking about blame. They've been sleeping at the switch, and they know it. But the internet has taken a lot of their revenue away, and so they have their problems. But H.R. 3808 basically will allow a bank to choose a jurisdiction in which they want their documents to be notarized. And I assure you, there will be a state, maybe it'll be North Dakota this time, okay? But there will be a state that will make it very, very convenient for the banks to basically do exactly what the banks did to credit card holders, okay? South Dakota basically enslaved everyone to their credit cards, okay? Paying 25, 30, 35% a year. The mob doesn't even charge that much. I mean, this is usury under any circumstances, almost in any country, Western nation in the world. But in South Dakota, it's not, and therefore in the United States, it's not, okay? You try charging a friend 30% a year, okay? And you will be hauled into jail, okay? It's illegal, and it's a crime here, and it's a crime in virtually every state. It's probably a crime in South Dakota too, except for the banks, okay? But having said that, if we allow this bill to go through, what will happen is that the banks will be allowed to find the lowest common denominator, and they will create their lowest common denominator for allowing certain kinds of notary fraud to continue. Now remember, what has happened with these banks over here is that documents were signed outside the purview of a notary. In some cases, the notary was false. In some cases, it wasn't even the right person. But if we dumb down and permit the lowest level of credibility to occur in one of the states, every single state in the union will have to follow that particular notary law. So the law is very innocuous. When you read it, it's very short, and it sounds very innocuous, but when you think about the implications, it becomes very clear that the reason this went to the Senate about a week ago, okay, the timing of this was identical to the time that the GMAC crisis was occurring. And, of course, the other banks with Chase and Bank of America also. So, if you've never done it before, it's really a lot of fun. You call 202-456-1111. Very nice person, probably some college kid who has a great internship, whose father probably gave a lot of money to some senator, is sitting there and works in the comment office, and their job is to write down the comments, what you tell them. And let me tell you, they tally these comments up. You hear that? They do tally them. And so you dial 202-456-1111, and you say you are opposed to H.R. 3808. It's going to hurt homeowners. It's once again a trap. It's once again something that the banks are pushing. It's not going to help the economy, and all it's going to do is once again push us back in the eyes of the rest of the world as a nation that isn't protecting property rights, that isn't protecting due process and the procedures that have been in place for hundreds of years in this nation. And the idea that it's sitting on the president's desk to be signed, I find remarkably flabbergasting. And the fact that both Democrats and Republicans have signed this thing went through like stealth, okay? And they're trying to get this through as quickly as possible. And the implications of that is that the kind of fraud that we have now seen will just be institutionalized if this bill goes through. So I highly recommend that you all consider making that phone call. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about what the implications of this crisis is to different groups of people. And let me just find my notes here, if I may. we have 6 groups of people or institutions that I'd like to talk about. Let's first talk about those people who are currently in foreclosure. Those folks who are currently in foreclosure, if you have a mortgage with one of the banks that we have mentioned, you need to scrutinize your documents. If you are subject to a summary judgment, we need to look at the affidavit that has been signed, and we need to determine if it's been signed by one of the robo notaries, okay? Not notaries, signers, and as well as the notary. We have a list. Many of those names have not yet been published. We know who they are. They are a lot more than the names that have been published in the press. And we have identified their signatures, and it is very clear that most of these people do not have multiple personalities that would allow them to have such different signatures. It's just impossible that the same person signed. It's also impossible that a notary would sign these different signatures. Just impossible. And so the fact that the courts don't want to recognize that means that you need to fight, okay? And that's what we're doing, and we've done it effectively, and we will continue to do it. So that's the first group, folks currently in foreclosure. The next group, and this is an unbelievable group, people who have lost their homes to foreclosure have the right to bring a fraud upon the court action, have their foreclosure voided, and get their property back. Let's write down these groups. Number 1, folks who are in foreclosure. 2, people who lost their homes. Now, if you do get the home back, it doesn't mean you get to permanently get it back. It means that you will then be subject, possibly, to another foreclosure unless the judges decide that they don't like being made monkeys of, and they want to teach the banks a lesson and want to make sure that this never happens again in this nation. And thus, it's conceivable that some of these banks, some of these mortgages will be deemed unenforceable as a matter of equity. Equity is a different kind of law. You have common law, you have equity, you have contract law. Equity is where a judge literally values the equities of different parties. And if one party has what's called unclean hands, what a great term that is, right? Like you didn't wash your hands before dinner, right? You have unclean hands. You can't come before the court of equity and ask for equitable relief because you yourself have done something that's inequitable. Very biblical, actually, when you think about it. And so the judges have the right to say, this foreclosure that you did was illegal, it's unenforceable, and because you did it with knowledge that you committed fraud, we're not going to give you a second bite at the apple. Now, that is a very powerful tool, and I am curious if the judges are going to have the wherewithal to administer that remedy. However, it is out there. It also gives you power to extract some sort of cash payment from the banks for having illegally kicked you out of your home. And so, if you have lost your home from GMAC, JPMorgan Chase,
Bank of America,
Wells Fargo, and we are even suggesting Wells Fargo, and soon there'll be other banks which I'm not going to mention this evening. We suggest you contact us, go to our website, call us, and we'll be glad to evaluate your foreclosure and determine if you were unfortunately dispossessed of your property through illegal, unconstitutional, and fraudulent means. I mean, if I had said this 2 years ago, okay, I'm telling you, you would have all thought that I was criminally insane. That I could stand here and accuse the largest banks in this nation of this kind of conduct, okay, is insane. But I'm not doing it alone, okay? Most of the attorney generals in the United States are on this. The U.S. senators are on this. There's certain members of the House of Representatives are on this. The Office of the Controller of the Currency is on top of this. And I think Fannie and Freddie sent a really funny letter, which I have to share with you, to 1,200 or 1,500 servicers this past week. They said to the servicers, quote unquote, "We expect you to follow the law as you complete your foreclosures, the laws of the United States and the laws of all 50 states." The Sun Sentinel published that. I almost fell off my chair. To think that a governmental agency would have to tell the servicers and their lawyers that they are expected to follow the law, okay, is unbelievable. I mean, we expect you to follow the law, okay? No. You're supposed to follow the law, and we're shocked that you haven't followed the law. The fact that they're not showing outrage, okay, so we now expect you to follow the law. What, they whacked? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And so, it's not me. It's me showing the outrage, the communal outrage. But it's not me. It's just a society that has run amok and that has allowed our institutions to get too big to fail, and too big to be challenged by the media, too big to be challenged by our own government officials, and clearly a problem that Robert Jarvis, a professor at Nova University and an old friend of mine from high school, says that is clearly too big for the judiciary. Robert feels that this is a crisis that is way beyond the judges, because they just aren't going to do it. They're not going to do it. And so I'm suggesting, and there's some other people who are already suggesting, that ultimately there'll have to be a claims process established, very similar to the claims process that was established for 9/11, very similar to the claims process that's being established for people who lost their businesses and their livelihoods because of the BP oil crisis. That you're going to have a national claims process for people who lost their homes illegally. Because otherwise, I don't know what's going to happen. But I do know that I don't believe that the judiciary is up to this task. And as Professor Jarvis is suggesting, he doesn't think it's institutionally set up to handle this task, particularly when they were sleeping at the switch.